Greetings. I assume you're here because you want to know the very core of how Springlocks suits work, and more importantly, you want to know how I made sense of Scraptrap's inconsistencies, and how I will remodel them in order to make sense in your tiny head. First, let's get into the basic stuff that pretty much everyone knows. Springlock animatronics are animatronics that double as both animatronics and suits. How can this possibly be? Well, animatronics have endoskeletons, which is basically the bones to the animatronic. So how are you meant to fit inside an animatronic with bones? Well, if you move these bones out of the way, then there's space for you inside. So how exactly do you just move the endoskeleton out of the way? Do you just take it out? Well, I'm afraid it's not that simple. Springlock suits have little locks called Springlocks that hold the endoskeleton out of place, making room for you to climb inside. Now, if you thought as I have, you may just think that the Springlocks move the endoskeleton to one side of the animatronic. But if that were the case, you wouldn't be able to fit inside. No, instead, the endoskeleton basically encases you in this basket sort of structure that widens with the Springlocks. It doesn't move the entire thing out of the way, it moves little individual parts out of the way. The tip of the Springlock resembles a bolt or other screw-like structures that you will use a hand crank in order to coil. It seems like many people choose to ignore this part of the process, instead aiming to just click the Springlocks in place. However, this is not how it works, as Fungi clearly states in FNAF 3.
To change the animatronics to suit mode, insert and turn firmly the hand crank provided by the manufacturer. Turning the crank will recoil and compress the animatronic part around the sides of the suit, providing room to climb inside.
I have made an animation of this process, which isn't too long, so I will share it with you now. To recap what you just saw, you enter the hand crank into the Springlocks, and turning it, you will force many of the endoskeleton parts around the edges of the suit so you can fit inside. Alright, now on to the part where I talk about the issues I have with stuff related to Springlock suits. Basically, criticism. If you don't want to see this part, I have timestamps in the description, so you can just skip this part. Alright, the first thing I want to talk about are these weird rings around Springtrap's eyes. You may think that this is translucent plastic, considering the fact that you can see Springtrap's pupils. But in FNAF Help Wanted, you can clearly see that these are actually made out of metal. They seem so random and out of place at first, they don't even seem to have a function. So I rattled around my brain for ages trying to find a solution to these really weird rings. But after a while, I finally thought of something that somewhat makes sense and is featured in my animation. These rings must be what hold and give power to the original animatronic eyes that are meant to be there, that you take out so you can see. Which brings me to the next part of the video. This comment in my last video of the animation that I just showed you. Specifically, this part at the bottom. This user said, by the way, you don't remove the endo eyes because the movie explains otherwise. I assume that's because in the movie they look like animatronic eyes. However, I do not believe this to be true, and I wrote a response to this person explaining why I believe this. The response reads as follows. The movie's non-canon, which is very clear by its inconsistencies, like how the books describe Springlock suits are also inconsistent. It is clear that the eyes must be removed because in the games, you can see William's rotting, bloodshot, ghostly eyes are clearly not an animatronic's eyes, further supported by the fact you can see his eyes in the skull in the corpse model. Plus, if the eyes couldn't be removed, how would you see? Clearly the mouth is too low because you can see William's mouth is at Springtrap's mouth level in the games. Also, I know what some of you may be saying. These eyes are way too forward in Springtrap's head, so the eyes wouldn't be in the right place. It would look ridiculous. And to that I say no. William's head is in the way, therefore it couldn't go all the way back as it should have. In the animation I showed that it's a bar that goes down. William's head would have blocked this from going all the way down, which I know I didn't show very clearly in the animation. That's because what I tried to create was limited by my animation skills. And before you say it, no, this pathetic little bar wouldn't pierce his flesh. Only the strongest pieces of endoskeleton would actually pierce his flesh. The rest of it would simply surround him in it. What probably killed him were the bars around his neck that would have suffocated him. It may surprise you that people these days actually try to create Springlock suits. And to that I'd like to turn your attention to this phenomenal YouTuber, which I highly encourage you to check out, called Technofur. What he has done with this project is nearly perfect, and I can't wait to see the finished result. But there's only so far you can go with these kind of projects, and there's two things I noticed that I want to point out to you guys. I really hate to say this because I'm not an engineer, I don't know anything about doing any of this stuff, and he's probably almost done, so I hate to crap on his work, but these are things that I felt I had to point out. Number 1, lack of hand creep. I already described this, so I don't have to go more in depth on it. But number 2, he seems to have what looks like the Endo 01 design for the head, which shouldn't be there. As I have said, the only way for Springlock suits to make sense is if the endoskeleton has a very minimal, basic, bar-like structure everywhere, almost like a basket. Having this giant block as a head right in the center pokes holes in pretty much everything, and you wouldn't really be able to fit inside of this if this head is inside as well. I do not know if this is a temporary thing, but it is something I've noticed ever since I first saw this video. But I think that concludes my criticism for now, and we can move on to the next part of the video. Alright, now on to Scraptrap's inconsistencies and how I will fix them. I am not ignoring the fact that Scraptrap is inconsistent, because yes, there are inconsistencies. First, the differences in William's corpse. One thing you may notice is that there's far more flesh inside Scraptrap's corpse than Springtrap's. I figured this to make it more anatomically correct. However, we're going to scrap this idea, as the model we're going to be doing today is based on the model that Springtrap already has, but don't worry, it's still going to look like Scraptrap. It's safe to assume that the fire of Fazbear Frights damaged William a lot, and flesh isn't invincible, so there's a good chance that a lot of this flesh just burned away into ash. But bones, however, they don't go away as fast. William was likely in a hurry, so bone damage was minimal. What remained was skull and bones, with only bits and pieces of flesh dangling on. The youth troop was quick to point out that this actually looks like a mummified head, but he was too busy focusing on why rather than why. He focused on the logic that it looks like a mummified skull, so it must be a mummified skull. And yes, these were probably for some reason Scott's intentions. Nonetheless, if it doesn't make sense, you can't just let the creator slip away with that. The focus should be why. Why would William mummify himself? Why would he do this? This wouldn't protect him any more than what he already is, especially in the suit. And more importantly, how? How would William get the materials to mummify himself? It just doesn't make sense. And we're gonna go ahead and say that that is non-canon, and Scott kinda just screwed up on this with the wrong ideas. So, how do you explain the rest of the bones that seemingly just appeared out of nowhere? Well, remember how I said the Springlock endoskeleton encases you? Well, yeah, the bones would have been hidden from view inside the endoskeleton. Therefore, in the original render, there would be no need to put bones. So in my redesign, I'm going to show the bones inside the endoskeleton, especially with the exposed arm, which is probably why the bones were added in the first place. coming out of the endoskeleton. The Earth Troop also pointed out that he thinks that William tried moving the endoskeleton and got most of it off, but this doesn't really make sense, as William is still attracted to sound, which is a mechanic from FNAF 3 that we know happens because the endoskeleton thanks to the phone guy, where he points out that the animatronics will turn and walk towards sound they hear.
For ease of operation, the animatronics are set to turn and walk towards sound they hear.
Therefore, we know that he's not doing it out of his own stupidity, and therefore, we know that it's the endoskeleton controlling him, which cannot be done with only a few measly little parts connected to his body. So yeah, I'll make the skull not look like a mummified head, and instead a skull with bits and pieces of flesh put onto it, hopefully. I'm not sure if this will work, because it'll be quite difficult to make it look good. And I will keep the endoskeleton, but add bones instead of it. Simple, right? Wrong! We forgot one teensy little problem. The thing that everyone sees, the actual suit itself. It is completely different from Springtrap. Well, yes, I do have an explanation for that too, which I thought is original, but isn't completely original. I know a few of you guys have heard this before and aren't big fans of it, but it is the only thing that truly makes sense to me. After the fire of Fazbear Frights, his suit was also badly damaged, and he needed to replace that. Fazbear Frights has collected many props from the past and actually found pieces of other suits, such as maybe another Spring Bonnie suit. I know some people think he just got up and went to another Fredbear's Family Diner, but answer me this. At what time in 2023 is Fredbear's Family Diner still gonna be freaking open? Anyway, he knows he's not just gonna go out and roam the world as a corpse, so he needed to cover himself up. And while yes, it is unlikely to see an animatronic on the streets, places like Chuck E. Cheese do tend to just throw them out sometimes, and it is certainly far more likely to see than corpse on the street. So he covered himself in a slightly different looking Spring Bonnie costume from the past, which all looks beat up, but he knows it's fine as he's meant to look like trash. So that basically summarizes the inconsistencies and how I'll fix them, and now I guess I'll just fix them and show you the finished product. Alright, to look at Scraptrap, let's first look at my redesign for Springtrap, which isn't that different, but I made it a little bit more consistent, which is especially visible underneath the suit. And here's my redesign for Scraptrap. As you can see, the problems that most people have are practically gone, and I fixed many of the inconsistencies. In fact, I'll remove the shell now, and you'll see that I put bones and stuff. And I always have found Burn Trap pretty annoying, as it's even more inconsistent to the already inconsistent. So therefore, I did a redesign of Burn Trap as well, built on what I already have from Scraptrap. So there you have it. Actually, here, take a look at a side-by-side comparison of Scraptrap and my version of Scraptrap. To be honest with you, I think it does pretty much everything that I wanted fixed with Scraptrap, and if I could, I would add this version to the game. I'm not even joking. I think it's so much better than what we have now, even though, yeah, it's pretty big of a meme. But anyway, this took like 2 weeks to make, and there are new things that popped up that unfortunately couldn't make the video, as they didn't appear until I was done with most of the video. And yeah, it was pretty annoying. This isn't the first time I've attempted to make this video. I've attempted plenty of times before, but I didn't like how they turned out. Anyway, see ya. Dead Walrus.